Most people think it's the hardest part of a project is actually getting started. I don't. I think the hardest part is staying committed after things stop going according to plan. When deadlines begin to slip, when stakeholders start asking difficult questions, when risks become issues and when issues become escalation, when the confidence everyone had at kickoff starts disappearing. Because here's what nobody tells you. Projects don't reveal your leadership when everything is working. They reveal your leadership when everything starts falling apart. And when things start falling apart, the question starts showing up. What happened? Why didn't we know about this sooner? Why wasn't this escalated? Who owns this? Why wasn't leadership informed? And whether we like it or not, somebody, maybe you, maybe me. Okay, let's be honest. Eventually, someone has to answer those questions. And most of the time, the majority of the time, it's for the project managers. That's usually us. That's where I learned something that changed how I led projects. When projects get messy, leadership is no longer about controlling outcomes. It's about mastering the controllables. I remember leading this project that I thought it was running on full self-driving. I mean, it was just driving itself. Every week during our weekly status meeting, I would ask the same questions. Any risk? No. Any issue? No. Anything leadership needs to know? Nope. Everything is on track. 1 week went by. Same answers. Another week went by. Same answers. The third week went by. No risk, no issues. Okay. We're going to hit our commitment. And that's when my project manager instincts started bothering me. They just started twinkling a little bit not because something looked wrong, because everything just looked too right. I know it. Maybe I am a very optimist person, but when you lead projects, you have to play both sides because even though everything looked too right, I decided to schedule individual conversations with each member of the project team. Fortunately, the team was only about 8 people. And what I discovered, goodness, I was shocked. You see, there was an unwritten belief operating within the team. Nobody had formally anywhere, but everyone seemed to understand the rule. If you raised a risk, if you reported an issue, if you turned the project from green to yellow or red, people might assume you weren't doing your job. So instead of discussing problems, people were managing perception. Wow. So instead of raising concerns, people were keeping them to themselves. And while the project looked green on paper, underneath the surface, there was dependencies, delays, concerns, obstacles that nobody felt like talking about it aloud. That's when I realized something. The project didn't have a risk problem. The project had a communication problem. So I gathered everything from those one-on-one conversations. And of course, you know what we did here. Documentation beats conversation. So we documented every concern, every dependency, every issue, every risk, because documentation was something I could control. Then I brought it back to the team. I never said who told what. That wasn't important. What was important was making sure everybody understood the truth. We were not as healthy as we thought we were. And that experience taught me one of the most valuable lessons to this day of my career. When projects start falling apart, leadership isn't about controlling every outcome. It's about controlling the things that are in your control. Because eventually someone's going to ask those questions we talked about earlier. What happened? When did we know? Why wasn't this escalated? Why wasn't leadership informed? And that's why today's conversation truly matters. Because when projects get messy, there are only 3 controllables that separate strong project managers from everyone else. Principle number 1, focus on the controllables. One of the biggest mistakes project managers make is spending an enormous amount of time and energy worrying about things they cannot control. You cannot control stakeholders' decisions. You cannot control organizational politics. You can't even control the budget reduction. You can't even control how priorities seem to shift. And you certainly cannot control every decision your project team makes. But there are things you can control: documentation, follow-up, risk identification, escalation, communication, and my favorite of them all, professionalism. Because when projects begin struggling, people rarely judge you on whether every problem was prevented. They judge you on whether you managed the things that were within your control. Here's the lesson here, family. When projects fall apart, leaders are often evaluated less by the outcome and more about how they manage the controllables. Here's 2 actionable tips I'd love for you to experiment with. Create a list of what you can and you cannot control during difficult projects. Next one, spend the majority of your energy on actions instead of frustration. I know that's going to be a tough one because I've struggled with it myself. I'm just being honest. Here's my professional advice, family. One of the greatest leadership skills you can develop is learning where to place your attention. The more attention you give to things outside of your control, the less effective you become. The strongest leaders focus their energy where they can actually create. But controlling the controllables only kind of gets you halfway there. Because even when you're doing the right things, people still need to know what is happening. And that's where my project begins to break down. Principle number 2, communication becomes more important under pressure. When projects are healthy, communication is appreciated. When projects are struggling, communications become essential. Matter of fact, you need to make that happen because if you don't make it happen, well, again, we go back to the questions. I've seen project managers avoid difficult conversations because they hope the issue would resolve itself. I've seen teams wait too long to escalate because they wanted one more week to figure it out. I've seen leaders delay sharing bad news because they didn't want to disappoint the stakeholders. Unfortunately, bad news doesn't improve with age. It usually gets worse because silence creates assumptions. Assumptions create confusion, and you know what confusion does. Confusion creates mistrust. Here's a lesson, family. Bad news delivered early creates options for you. Bad news delivered late creates consequences. Here's 2 actionable tips I'd love for you to experiment with. Escalate sooner than feels comfortable. Next one. Increase communication frequency during uncertainty. Here's my professional advice, family. Your credibility is rarely damaged because a problem exists. Your credibility is often damaged because people feel blindsided by the problem. Communication, I'll say that again, communication is not about protecting yourself. Communication is about protecting the project. But there's just one more challenge. Even when you're documenting everything, even when you're communicating appropriately, pressure eventually makes a decision to show up. And when pressure shows up, leadership gets tested. Principle number 3, emotional control creates leadership credibility. The moment projects become difficult, emotions begin showing up. Stakeholders become frustrated. Executives become impatient. And teams become discouraged. Deadlines create stress. Expectation creates pressure. And suddenly, everyone is looking for the certainty. The question is simple. What version of you shows up when pressure arrives? Because leadership is not measured by how you behave when things are easy. Leadership is measured by how you behave when things become difficult. People borrow confidence from leaders who remain steady during uncertainty. Here's the lesson, family. People trust leaders who remain steady when circumstances become unstable. Here's 2 actionable tips I'd love for you to experiment with. Pause before responding to an emotional charged situation. Next one, focus on facts before forming conclusions. Here's my professional advice, family. Emotional control does not mean you don't care. It means you care enough to respond instead of react. Some of the best leadership decisions I've made happen because I slowed down before actually speaking. So we're going to focus on the controllables. We're going to communicate early. We're going to manage our emotions, simple concepts, but under pressure, that's where leadership separates itself from management. Here's the final reflection, family. The longer I led projects, the more I realized something. Most projects don't fail because of one massive mistake. They fail because small problems remain hidden for too long. A risk that wasn't discussed, an issue that wasn't escalated, a concern that wasn't documented, a difficult conversation that never happened. And eventually, those small problems, well, it's like a snowball effect. They become larger problems. That's why staying in the game when everything starts falling apart isn't really about toughness. It's about discipline, the discipline to focus on what you control, the discipline to communicate when conversations become uncomfortable, and the discipline to maintain your composure when pressure starts building. Because eventually every project manager will sit in a room where we go right back to that question board when someone asks, what happened? The goal is not to have all the answers. The goal is to know you manage the controllables. As you know, projects do get messy. Leadership get messy. Life gets messy. But don't confuse a difficult season with a failed outcome. Stay focused, stay professional, stay communicative, stay in the game, because when everything starts falling apart, that's often the moment leadership becomes visible. We know the motto here: documentation beats conversation. Focus on the controllables, because sets and reps beat talent when talent doesn't do the reps. I go by the name ED. For all you smart and intelligent folks out there, that just simply means air. Until next time.